So this is class 115 on the Golden Doves. We're on page 65. We study negativity. In Hegel, we study negativity. In Freud, they were more concerned with the political. In the case of Hegel, history. In the case of Freud, the psychological. Now we're going to be studying Maimonides. Maimonides approaches negativity from a radically different perspective, that of the Philonic tradition concerning the unknowability of God. So we know that God is unknowable, right? And because God is unknowable, when the Torah tells us something about God, it doesn't mean it literally, right? But the Berat Torah Kilshon Bnei Adam. So, for example, you say Ha'el Agadol. Gadol means big. So you say, okay, he's big. Well, big size is a spatial concept. God doesn't exist in space, so he couldn't really be big in the normal sense that we mean big. So we know that God isn't small, but what does it mean exactly by big, right? So so by negative theology, we mean don't take big in the literal sense, because if you did, that would imply space. Okay. Since God cannot be known, all his attributes are to be interpreted negatively. Whatever you say about God, it has to be interpreted in a sense that is different than the literal sense. Again, in a negative sense. So you say, Gibor, God is strong. He's all powerful. He's omnipotent. Well, I mean, he has power, but power involves energy. Energy involves matter. It involves some sort of existence that we can understand in terms of physics, in terms of chemistry. But God is not within the rules of physics and chemistry. So again, even when we say Gibor, we mean it in a negative sense. By negative sense, we mean to say, well, we know he's not weak, and we know he has the ability to do whatever he wants to do with no encumbrances, but it's not strong in the typical sense of strength, right? On this point, Maimonides coincides with the position of some of the church fathers and Muslim theologians, especially the Muslim theologians, the Mutakalimun. They dealt very deeply with issues related to God's existence and what it means, and on some points, there are some commonalities, as in everything, between Harambam and some of the Muslim theologians, because not everything they say is automatically incorrect. There are some things that they say that are correct. There's one God. What does oneness mean? There's a lot to be said. But of course, Harambam transcends and goes much further than they do. Right? We must note at the very outset that the negativity here does not deny the predicate of existence to God. Right? So Jacques Derrida, he tries to explain negative theology as to deny the predicate of existence to God. Right. So he's right when we say that God doesn't exist in the conventional sense of existence. Jacques Derrida is correct. Right. And then Jacques Derrida continues and says, in order to recognize him as a superior, the reason we deny the predicate of existence to God is to say God is superior. This is Jacques Derrida. Inconceivable, God cannot be understood. Ineffable, mode of being, right? Can't pronounce God even, right? So that's what Jacques Derrida says about God. My father disagrees. Again, this is the way of the Hachamim. We don't automatically say anything that a goy says, a Muslim theologian or Jacques Derrida, a post-structuralist. I believe he was Jewish, by the way, right? That's not the point. We don't automatically, we examine what they say, and if they say something correct, we'll accept it. But in this case, Jacques Derrida said something that's incorrect. He says God is superior. Right? Superior presupposes a common ground for comparison, right? Something unacceptable to Maimonides. You see, even the Muslim theologians, they would say God is superior. Jacques Derrida said God is superior. You can't say God is superior, because, again, that presupposes, this phone has superior computing power than this remote. Okay, because there's some commonality. They're both physical. They both have some sort of, I guess, maybe internal processor. I don't know how these things work, honestly. But there is commonality. This book is bigger than this book, right? They both exist in space, and then we can say this is bigger than that. When you say God is superior to us, you're assuming there is some commonality between us and God. That's incorrect, right? People like to say we're chelek Elohim imal. No, we're not. I mean, that's sacrilegious from the perspective of Harambam. Right? So my father disagrees with Jacques Derrida on this point. Whatever the sense of recognition in conjunction with inconceivable may be, Again, my father is poking fun at Jacques Derrida. Um, right, so he says we have to recognize that God is inconceivable. So my father points out, what do you mean? You recognize that is inconceivable. But okay, fair enough. It has nothing to do with either the basis of or the objectives of negativity. That's not what negativity is about. So Jacques Derrida did not understand negative theology correctly. Right? Negative theology is not grounded on some ontological principle, ontology, to do with existence, and negativity means it doesn't exist. And no. Again, all these people, they're infected by Greek metaphysics, and even when they go beyond Greek metaphysics, they still apply Greek metaphysics to understanding those things. And so here, there's ontology. Ontology is a Greek metaphysical concept, right? Like Bergson, Maimonides rejects the notion of negation in nature. So the idea of negation in nature is perhaps an idea that I will discuss next time. But let's just read this last sentence. Negativity here is related to language, and that's the point. Words, speech, right? Kenneth Burke wrote, and here's a quote: "The paradox of the negative is simply this. Quite as the word tree is verbal, and the thing tree is non-verbal," right? So you're using a word, tree, to describe that. That's not a word. That's an actual thing. That's a non-verbal thing. So all words for the non-verbal must, by their very nature of the case, discuss the realm of the non-verbal in terms of what it is not. So anytime a word is used to describe things, the word itself is verbal. So you're using a verbal thing to indicate things that are non-verbal. So you see there's a paradox here. Hence, to use words properly, we must spontaneously have a feeling for the principle of the negative. That's the idea of negativity. Words are verbal symbols. They're metaphors. When I use a word to describe something, that something is completely outside the word. So let's look at this leaf. So this is a leaf. I hope you can see it in the camera, right? I'm going to cut it off. Hopefully I won't get yelled at later. This is a leaf. So you all recognize this as a leaf? Why do you recognize it as a leaf? Well, you associate the word leaf with this leaf. But maybe I shouldn't recognize it as a leaf. Maybe there should have been a word for each one of these indentations, right? So if I just took a branch with a bunch of leaves on it, you would have recognized it as a bunch of leaves. This you recognize as one leaf. Perhaps this should have been called something in language, and this should have been called something in language, and we don't even know what word. And there might be a word for this indeed. Or these little indentations could have been called something in language. So language, which is verbal, helps us to understand things which are not verbal, but by imposing language, verbal, on the nonverbal, I'm making certain assumptions about the nonverbal, and I'm structuring the nonverbal in terms of the verbal, right? So this could have been not a leaf; it could have been, a series of chichus, right? It's a bunch of chichus, depending what I call each one of these things, right? So when you speak about negative, what we mean is not like Jacques Derrida said, and not like most of the people think. Negative understanding is, first of all, and beginning, understand the limitation of language, because at its essence, language is a different thing than the nonverbal things. So there's that chasm. So what is understanding? What is knowledge? We'll continue.